Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we continue to deliberate the various developments, both here in Israel, throughout the region, and beyond, it's always important to highlight how this war began. 215 days ago, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a heinous massacre, murdering some 1,200, mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people. 133 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, if you may focus on two main issues right now, the ongoing operation in the Gazan border town of Rafah, as well as the negotiations in Egypt, as well as the communications here in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv with regard to the potential hostage release deal in exchange for major Israeli concessions. What can you tell us about that?
So we hear that in the United States, especially in the Midwest, there are tornadoes with some devastating results. And here in Israel, we are undergoing two lesser storms, but nevertheless, they are shaking up the body politic and the defense establishment. The first one, as you mentioned, is the minor operation in Rafah. This is not the major ground operation. It is only intended to get operational control over the Rafah crossing into Egypt, but from the Palestinian side, and have some firefights, some engagement with Hamas squads in the eastern outskirts of Rafah, the town itself. The other storm is brewing over the diplomatic maneuvers by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar regarding the proposal which Hamas has responded to positively, but this was not the same and identical proposal which Israel has approved earlier. So there is a tug of war right now between Washington, Tel Aviv, where the cabinet is sitting during wartime, and Cairo, where the delegations are meeting, mostly led by the intelligence chiefs, in order to iron out the differences when Hamas is now threatening that if the talks are to break down, of course they are blaming Israel, then the fate of the hostages who are still alive in Hamas captivity will be quite somber. They do not threaten to execute them, but one can infer from that this is possible. In addition to that, there are firefights in other spots in Gaza, and of course along the Lebanese border, where the Hezbollah UAVs, the drones, have been at late hitting Israel more lethally and more accurately than before, and the Israeli air defense forces are now trying to perfect their response to it.
You know, I find it quite baffling that a terrorist organization designated as such by the US State Department, by the European Union, by other Western and civilized nations comes out and says, you know what, I accept the deal with plenty of amendments which you did not agree upon, but I have accepted the deal, now it's in your court. And then certain mouthpieces that echo whatever Hamas says, including Al Jazeera, comes out and quotes that as they have accepted the deal, and everybody in the international community seems to quote them unhindered as if they have accepted something that was put on the table without any anecdotes or amendments, which seems very weird that so many very senior reporters would not go down into the various outlines and points that were made during those discussions and actually research this deeper to provide people around the world with actually truth about the situation at hand. But let's turn to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you particularly about the operation in Rafah, because on the one hand, the United States came out and recognized that it is a limited operation. On the other hand, you hear Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant coming and saying, no, this is only the first step, and unless we eliminate the Islamist Hamas or the first hostages released, we will not stop at this military operation that for some reason has stopped only at the Rafah border crossing rather than going the entire way of the 12.65 kilometers of the Philadelphia line, which is still the oxygen channel of the Islamist Hamas entry from the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula into the Gaza Strip, which is very peculiar in my sense, at least.
Well, Jonathan, we talked about it more than once that the IDF is not going to, share his plans on the media or with everyone around us in any way. So I don't think that there is really someone not among us here and not also in the outer world or in the international world that really knows what is the exact plans. The only ones that are really knowing it are the commanders of the IDF and the cabinet that approved it. So at least at this point, I would take what was said by the commanders of the IDF and by our cabinet. What we are seeing here, this is the first step. This could be going further to a second and third step. Of course, the operation, part of it is being revealed, but not all of it, as I said. And how deep do you go? What exactly do you do? It is also a connection to the deal. Unfortunately, we call it this way with the hostages. I mean, those two things are, in a way, relevant to each other. So at least at this point, I think that what has been done in the last 48 hours was very successful, very quick. We must say that Israel took control on the Rafah on the Rafah entry through the Palestinian part. It was done swiftly. There were some fights, but tens and tens of terrorists died during this fight. So it looks good for this 48 hours. You're right that it should be second and third step to it. But as I said, this is something that there is a lot of other consideration in order to decide to move to those steps. So at this point, I think if we are looking on the last 48 hours, good start. But we need to see where this thing is going. And now we are talking, of course, on a very narrow perspective on the military point of view of this campaign, but it has much larger consequences which are on the strategic level, and this I'm sure we would elaborate it during this update.
Thank you, General Gavish. Let's now turn to the United Kingdom, London, where we're joined by retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, formerly a senior director at the National Security Council for Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, as well as a U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, and currently, of course, the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies. It's good to see you, Colonel. I'd like to immediately dive into something that is also raising many questions, and that is the Associated Press quoted a senior U.S. official as saying that, or acknowledging that heavy munitions that were intended or designated for Israel in its war effort have been delayed with no date of arrival yet. At the time when we hear President Joe Biden coming out in a speech at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., proclaiming yet again that he does not forget the atrocities of Hamas on October 7th, and that he remains a steadfast supporter of the State of Israel in its fight against the horrendous Islamist terrorist organization, Hamas. What am I missing here?
Well, I think I've come to the conclusion that the Biden administration decided some time ago that the destruction of Hamas as a military organization and as a governance organization in Gaza is not possible. And so which means that there was a divergence at some date in the last few months between the White House and Israel on one of Israel's stated war aims, one of Israel's major stated war aims. I don't think the White House will not say that explicitly, but we are left to infer it. For example, day before yesterday, John Kirby, who speaks on national security affairs for President Biden, said that you can't destroy an ideology through military operations, meaning referring to Hamas as an ideology. Well, he may or may not be right about that. You certainly can destroy a military adversary through military operations, and I think that's what Israel's strategic objective in the campaign was, not to try to. I mean, I don't think Israel's trying to destroy the Hamas ideology through military operations. They know that. So it's neither here nor there, but I think it illustrates where the Biden administration's minds are, that Hamas is there to stay. Hamas is an ideology that has staying power, and that Israeli operations, therefore, if Hamas can't be destroyed, then Israeli operations to destroy Hamas are an exercise in futility. And since there's a political cost, a deep political cost to be borne for them, then the Biden administration would just prefer that they stop. I think that's really where we are. And that's why the administration has shown that it's willing to use security assistance leverage to try to bring that about. I think that's a horrible mistake, not just because, in my view, the United States has a vital interest, shared interest with Israel in destroying Hamas as a military organization. I mean, Hamas killed more than 30 Americans on October 7th and still reportedly is holding American hostages. That has to stop. So Hamas is an adversary not just of Israel, but of the United States. But beyond that, really, I think the Biden administration, taken in tandem with what the Obama administration did through the JCPOA and other things, I think really there have been too many times that the Biden administration has denied assistance, whether security assistance or financial assistance, to allies that are in crisis. That was their attitude toward Saudi Arabia and the UAE against the Houthi threat. And now we can see what the Houthi threat is to the world. That's the way they treated Egypt at the beginning of the administration, by denying it aid at a time when Egypt was in financial crisis and still is. And I think this is just the latest in a series of mistakes of signaling to the world that the United States, at least the Biden administration, cannot be counted upon to treat its allies as allies in time of crisis, in crises that involve what should be the vital interests of the United States.
It's very discouraging indeed. Nevertheless, I ask myself, at a time when the U.S.-led coalition is still operating as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, which you've, of course, been also a part of, together with Jim Jeffries, Bill Robach, and many others who've done beyond the call of duty to try and eradicate this radical Islamist organization in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere. It seems quite baffling to me that while that operation is still ongoing for good reason, the operation against Hamas is supposedly within that same context, but not pursued in the same determination in Washington as it should be. Nevertheless, Mr. Owen, it's not a matter of why, it is a matter of what. And ultimately, when it comes to different considerations, are Israel and the United States so off course when it comes to policy vis-a-vis the Middle East?
So some of us here have been long enough in this business to have witnessed the Republican administration of Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger back in 1975, and their reassessment of Middle East policy in order to punish Israel for its refusal to sign the second Sinai disengagement agreement. And part of that quote unquote reassessment was holding back arms shipments until the message got through. Israel at the time had great allies in Congress, including the 76 senators who signed a letter to Ford. I believe Biden was one of them. But and eventually Israel relented, and Prime Minister Rabin did sign this agreement on the way to Sadat's visit to Begin after Rabin was no longer prime minister. What happened here was that on April the 4th, a month ago, President Biden called Prime Minister Netanyahu and clarified his opposition to the Rafah operation. Immediately after that, Netanyahu decided to disregard Biden's requests, which of course also had political undertones, the campus protests and all of that, and came out with provocative statements, not the operation itself. The operation itself was on hold, but Netanyahu made sure, in order to appease his extreme right wing, that every day or so, there will be statements saying we will go to Rafah no matter what. It was really uncalled for. And apparently some of Biden's advisors told him that he must show political will. First, in the move itself, which was kept secret. And when the message was not received in Israel, they also made sure that it's in the press.
Irrespective of Netanyahu's rhetoric and the merit behind an operation in Rafah, which I think there is consensus amongst many generals in the IDF, as well as the defense establishment at large, at the importance of entering Rafah and completing the job there, irrespective of the war cabinet and the people within it. I'd like to ask General Kavish to provide some insight, since that same remarks that you were referred to, that phone call, the state of Israel or the IDF pretty much lowered its war intensity since mid-March. And since mid-March to date, there were various negotiations in basically accommodating the American request to lower the intensity for the purpose of reaching yet another hostage release deal in exchange for a temporary ceasefire. And what we've gotten until this very point in time was more foot dragging by Hamas, which understood that it does not need to relent. Am I missing here something?
Well, you know, Jonathan, it goes back to this point that it's a war which you kind of you're playing with the military efforts, diplomatic efforts, and it's going back and forth. Sometimes you need to go forward with your military efforts. It allows you to gain some maybe things on the diplomatic side of it. And we have to remember that in this war, it is a bit more challenging, or quite more challenging, because at least in Israel, the issue of the hostages, this is something that among the Israeli public, a lot of them see them as a priority one. So there are all kind of different considerations that needs to be taken before making this decision of going in, how to go in, and so on. And once again, we have to take in account what is the, of course, our allies from the United States, but also the Egyptians, and what are the applications of what we are doing in Rafah to other sectors, and so on. So it is much more broader than only going in. It is not so simple. You have really to take all those consideration. But at the bottom line, we have to say that, at least from the IDF point of view, there was no question that we need to go into Rafah. This was again and again stated by the commander of the IDF, also by our cabinet. But there was some gap between what was looked like that we are going into Rafah almost every day in the last 2 months. So the statements were once, and what happened was different. We still have to remember that going into Rafah was something that if we would ask a lot of our allies, we shouldn't do it. But Israel decided to do it. So you really are trying to be on the point that is balancing between all those interests. Again, at the bottom line, we have to remember that in the last 48 hours, Israel started a campaign in this part of the Gaza Strip, took the Rafah entry from the Palestinian side, and this could be going forward, and it's a matter of a decision, because the plans are there and everything is ready for it.
Indeed. Well, with all the reservations and the sacrifice and the challenges that may arise from such an operation, I think that it's vital for Israel, from my personal opinion, for Israel to enter into Rafah and conclude the job with a lot of care, also for the population, because it is a complex operation with many civilians in harm's way, and therefore those civilians need to be carefully relocated, and it will come at a cost, nonetheless, a cost that Israel needs to pay to ensure that everybody around Israel knows that Israel is here to stay, and that is also something that was relayed by IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, to the troops before entry into Rafah. But we don't have very much time left, and there's still one point that I'd like to raise, and that is the Lebanese Front. Colonel Rayburn just yesterday, a member of the war cabinet, namely Minister Benny Gantz, came out and highlighted to the residents of northern Israel that by September 1st, no matter what, they will make sure that all residents will be able to return to their homes. Does this indicate, in your perspective, something of a more determined push by Israel in order to force Hezbollah north of the Litani River in accordance with UN Security Council Resolution 1701?
Well, instead of looking at it from the Israeli side of it, let's look at it from the Beirut side, where it's sort of the usual nothing, the usual flights in and out of envoys and a series of papers that lay out formulas for implementing 1701 that the Iranian regime and Hezbollah are never going to agree to. It's an exercise in futility. And it's not going to bring about any result. The latest is there's a French proposal that's being sort of batted back and forth in a game of badminton, and Nabi Berri, on behalf of Hezbollah, has swatted away. Nabi Berri always, whatever the proposal is, he always has just a few concerns, which are poison pills, which always kill whatever deal it is. That's what's happening right now. I don't think there's any prospect whatsoever of a diplomatic agreement with Hezbollah to implement 1701 in a way that's actually going to stick. And so that means that we're back in the military phase there. And likely, just as an outside observer, as a friend to Israel and as a friend to the Lebanese too, it looks to me like this is a train wreck coming. And it's a train wreck because the Iranian regime and Hezbollah, even in under the intense military pressure that they're under in southern Lebanon, do not want to relinquish their toehold on the Israeli border. They want to keep it for strategic purposes as leverage in the broader war that the Iranian regime has manufactured unnaturally against Israel. That's where we are, and I think there's a very high risk then of an escalated military confrontation in the north in the coming months.
Nabi Berri, the Speaker of Parliament and leader of Amal, which is the second most powerful Shiite movement in Lebanon. Mr. Oren, your perspective to this?
There is some contradiction in the priorities which the Israeli war cabinet sees before itself. Everybody agrees that the center of gravity should have been shifting from Gaza to Lebanon. Hezbollah is the stronger enemy and one that Israel should deal with, if not today, within the next couple of years. It cannot remain as a constant threat with, who knows, 150,000, maybe even more rockets and missiles constantly threatening Israel. But in order to do that, Israel needs a ceasefire in Gaza, both because Hezbollah always states that once there is this ceasefire in the south, it too will obey a similar ceasefire, and also because Israel would like to have all of its army divisions ready for the northern operation. And one would have thought that this would make the Israeli government more willing to compromise on the formula which CIA Director Bill Burns and his Egyptian counterpart have come up with regarding Gaza, because this is strategy. Just like in World War II, it was Europe first, the Pacific second, even though Pearl Harbor was, of course, attacked by Japan. That's the art of leadership. You must prioritize, and only when you get rid of your strongest enemy can you go back to dealing with the secondary one.
Indeed, but there are also instances in history, and many of them, including when Turkey came down, or the Ottomans came down to conquer the Levant in 1516, we saw them first defeating the Persians to make sure that they do not have that threat in the rear. They also did the same with the Armenians and many others to ensure that they can go and deal with the Mamluks at the time. So we can go back in memory lane and find other alternatives as well. But General Gavish, I'd like to hear...
I choose the anecdotes which suit my theory.
Well, of course, and I'll go for my own anecdotes to counter them. But General Gavish, naturally, once the IDF concludes its operation in Rafah and eliminates the final 4 battalions, it can relinquish the job of mowing down the remaining terror cells in the Gaza Strip to special operators who are well-trained to conduct those kind of operations and divert its powerful ground forces to contend with Hezbollah. Is that in the cards? I know you do not speak, obviously, about operational plans publicly, but at the same time, would this be advisable in the event that you were asked?
Well, let's put it this way, Jonathan. The IDF is ready today, not tomorrow and not the day after tomorrow. If it would be needed to operate in the northern arena, the IDF is ready literally today. This is the IDF role in this game, to allow the decision making, allow them to make any decision and to operate accordingly. If a decision would be a campaign in the northern part of Israel, this is what the IDF is ready for. And, another anecdote, that if we're looking at it, let's say, only from the defensive point of view for a second, what we've learned from the last few months with the Hezbollah, from what we've seen with the Houthis, and also with Iran lately, is quite encouraging, in the meaning that the IDF capabilities to deny those efforts by our enemies, and this is without operating in the attack part of our strategy. And once all of those means would be working together, the attack from one side, the defense from the other side, it would look even, I think, much more encouraging than what people are expecting. So if we would need to do it, the IDF is there for it tomorrow.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so we'll leave it at that. I'd like to thank Colonel Rayburn, General Gavish, and Mr. Oren for your insights today. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.